Boys Sell the Game was created using RPG Maker 2003, and is probably one of the most interesting development histories of any game I've ever played or discussed on this channel. The game's various elements were crafted by 10 to 14-year-old boys, and were then blended together by their religious education teacher over the course of a week. And if you couldn't guess from the information I've provided already, this game does contain religious elements in line with certain aspects of Christian theology. And seeing as I'm a non-believer, these elements at best leave me mildly irritated, and at worst can set me off on near rants where I'm foaming at the mouth, depending on how many times I've heard them and how annoying that element of Christianity is for me. As such, I take my review of this game with a bit of salt in terms of my overall assessment, since I'm openly going to admit that I may not be able to separate my thoughts and opinions on Christianity from my review of the game itself. Story-wise, the game is built around a very basic excuse plot, with 4 heroes from another dimension fighting their way to the top of a paracenter in order to rescue young boys from the evil clutches of a supervillain. As such, the story lacks any sort of characterization or emotional draw, but not every game needs to be particularly deep in terms of its plot or characters, as long as the gameplay itself is strong enough. But is that the case for this game? In terms of gameplay, the game is a very simple dungeon crawler with turn-based combat, with most of the enemies appearing on screen, but in one area the encounters appear to be random. Sadly, the combat balance is a bit lacking, since you'll easily cleave your way through most enemies with minimal effort. But a few of the boss fights can prove to be a bit of a challenge if you refuse to utilize your special abilities. Of course, if you use those abilities, the fights can be rather boring, since enemies may be rendered unable to fight back. Outside of the rather dull combat, the game does get a chuckle out of me by having the heroes heal up by taking a load off in the throne room, if you catch my drift. Graphically speaking, the game does appear to feature a lot of custom work, but at the same time the game also suffers from some of the sprites appearing to come from different sources. Sound-wise, the game is probably alright, and I say probably since the soundtrack is completely forgettable, in my opinion. So much so that I can't even remember if the game had background music, and I'm merely assuming that it does right now. Boys Sell the Game might make for a decent time killer as long as you avoid talking to the penguins, but its overall enjoyment is still rather low in my opinion, since it lacks the strong gameplay it would need to carry itself with its highly simplistic narrative.